everybody, it's Sarah and it's Spirited Saturday, and today I was going to talk about gender identity and gender roles and the role of gender in eating disorders, because they are very much intertwined for a lot of people. I actually took a leisure and special education class earlier this year, and it was really interesting because it sort of demonstrated that the concept of minority and of disability and of all those sort of special groups that we targeted is very much our concept of that is very much socially constructed. And I've always wondered how much or to what extent are eating disorders also socially constructed. A lot of times, well, most times, there are a lot of people who have eating disorders that have some sort of conflict with their gender. By that I don't mean that everyone out there who has an eating disorder has a gender conflict, or that in order to have a gender conflict you also have to have an eating disorder. That's not what I mean. But generally, what I'm talking about is that people are uncomfortable with their gender for some reason, or with the way that they identify with it. Like for example, I'm your typical, Caucasian female. I would not typically be associated with any minority group except women. So people might not assume that I would have any sort of conflict with gender in the way that society expects women to be, i.e. tall, blonde, big boobs, perfect in every way, young forever kind of thing. But I really resent being a woman, because in my experience it's always meant powerlessness and being dominated over. And I really that was a difficult thing for me, where most people celebrate, or where some people celebrate their curves and their, everything like that. That's very difficult for me, because I identify that with something very bad and very painful. So, that's the type of gender conflict. If, there's a surprising number of people who have eating disorders that are either transgendered, or gay, lesbian, or bisexual. And I find that very interesting. And this is my theory on it. If it's not accepted in your environment, then an eating disorder distracts from your sexuality, by making you obsessed with food, by making you obsessed with your body, and very hesitant to be close or intimate to anybody, or by making you very underweight and looking kind of prepubescent or like a child. And all of that, I think, is a distraction from an issue, which is that you don't feel that you fit in, or you don't feel that you're accepted because of whatever reason, your orientation, your identity, your gender identity, or whatever. There's a lot of athletes, the expectation is for women to look perfect everywhere, and that doesn't happen. There's a lot of athletes that bulk up a lot. I'm one of them. When I started training 25 hours a week, those are the days that, honest to God, I'm like, thank God for big boobs, because nobody will forget that I'm a woman or assume that I'm a man. And I know that a lot of times at the gym it's really, really uncomfortable because you can lift more or you're stronger than the guy next to you, and that's not acceptable. And I actually swim, and people ask, oh, well, the prevalence of eating disorders isn't that high because you don't have to be thin. Well, no, you don't have to be thin, but you still have to look good in a suit, like a swimsuit. And so eating disorders often are sort of fertilized in that soil of expectation, or that foundation of expectation for female athletes. A lot of times to, women who don't fit that typical, stereotypical image of perfection. Tall, blonde, perfect, submissive, all that. And an eating disorder is kind of a way to pursue that. And then this is where a lot of the BDD comes in, and the symptoms of like over plastic surgery and spending thousands on your parents and everything like that, just sort of in an effort to pursue that ideal and to pursue that perfection. Different ethnic groups prefer different characteristics on their gender, and different races have higher prevalences of certain physical characteristics. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, black women don't get eating disorders. That's not true. But I do wonder, do eating disorders present differently in African American women than in the typical Caucasian population that middle class is generally studied when we talk about eating disorders, because it is generally more acceptable to have a more full body. A lot of times to age, like you're not supposed to ever get old. And I feel like sometimes an eating disorder is a way for overcompensating that. Your fat does redistribute all over your body, and you might not like it, so an eating disorder will stop that, or will slow that down, or whatever. And people are like, oh, well, it's a young woman's disease. That's not really that true. Yes, it's typically associated with adolescence and early 20s, but there's another major time in people's lives where they relapse, and that is in their late 40s, late 50s, after their children have grown up. They've stopped working, and a lot of times people aren't sure of their self-image anymore. And again, an eating disorder is a nice distraction from that. When I say gender, I mean, gender is a socially constructed concept as well. Very, very much socially constructed. Your sex is what you're biologically predispositioned. So you're either a male, X and Y, or you're female, two X's. Now if you're like me, you'll ask, what about if you have like two X's and a Y, which is actually possible. And if you're interested, you can email me and I'll tell you what it is. But this isn't a biology lesson. But gender is sort of the set of expectations, the set of attitudes, values, morals, beliefs, just the prescribed set of ideals that go with the biological sex for that culture. And I've always wondered, if we thought differently about our genders, would eating disorders stop? Would they change? Would they decrease, increase? Would they present differently? I don't know. It's just a really neat idea. And yeah, so definitely leave your own thoughts and comments and whatever. And I will see you next week.